Good evening, Moran. Thank you for being the chat GPT of our session and sorting me out when my speech didn't support me. But it's interesting because you've done a bunch of cool things that come in your bio, and most importantly, he is left-handed. Now, I'll let you infer what you want from that. But Moran, pleasure to have you here at the India Today Conclave. Let's start off with a real seminal moment for you. Was it Jan 6, 2021? You get a call from the White House, and the advisor to the President of the United States, none other than Joe Biden, requests you to come in for a consultation and advise the President of the United States on critical decision-making in the time of a nuclear crisis. How did that really pan out, and what are your main takeaways from that session?
So this is a story I never told this way, so I'll kind of tell the full story the way it actually happened. In the US, the president gets elected in November, and then they have a couple of months before they take office. So there's 3 months where the president basically gets trained on all the things that they would have to do. One of those things is the nuclear launch protocol, as in what the president needs to do in order to launch nuclear weapons. In the US, the president is the only authority for that. There's no checks and balances. He alone gets to decide it. So a colleague of mine was the person whose job was to train him. And because I knew her and I knew how it works, I spoke to her about the process. And she got my kind of intuitions and thought on how to train a person to make decisions of that level. Then January 6th, as most of you probably know, was the famous insurrection where people raided the Capitol. And one of the things that Biden was asking, how do I know that my predecessor, President Trump at the time, doesn't start a nuclear war against who knows where, Venezuela, and just stays in power because he's now the person who does it and there's no way to stop him. And as it turns out, there is no way to stop that because it's a one-man show on this particular decision. So Biden said that in a way, once he takes office, one of the things he wants to do is create a new protocol, something that will create more checks and balances. It happens to be the case that my colleague and my friend, the woman who I spoke to, became quickly the undersecretary under Biden for nuclear weapons. And that's when her team and others reached out to me and said, okay, we want to change the protocol, but now the question is, how do we create a new one? And because they said, knew that the current protocol, as in the one that exists right now, was invented many years ago by scientists, Oppenheimer, Fermi, Einstein, and the likes, they wanted to bring a scientist and have him advise on how to make the new one. That's the project we're working on for the last couple of years.
It's very interesting because the other thing that I missed out in that introduction, so we have furniture designer, filmmaker, storyteller, hacker, as a tech geek, professor, security specialist in Israel as well, and of course a professor at the Columbia School of Business. Now just to paint that picture for the audience, what is it like and what exactly does your daily job entail as a professor of neuroscience at a leading business school in the US?
So it probably won't be surprising to the people here that lately neuroscience isn't just about studying the brain, it's about how to turn our understanding of thinking into other things like businesses, like decisions, like understanding our emotions, many things in this realm. So more and more companies are now looking to neuroscientists to help them make better decisions or even understand their clients in a different way. Many of the companies that are in Silicon Valley are now trying to understand how customers think, what would make them engaged, what would make them care about something, how to get them more addicted to stuff, and their neuroscientists are instrumental in helping them. This is why a business school said we need a neuroscientist in the faculty who can help both kind of interact with those companies, but also help do research on not only how we can use that, but also what are the ways to make sure it's not doing anything bad.
So when we're talking about neuroscience, it's a very interesting space that's hotting up because there's a gentleman named Elon Musk. And he's working on Neuralink. Human trials have begun. He's been marketing it across the world. And then I've seen a lot of startups like Synchron who are also working in the same space. If you could tell us how this can actually transform the way we lead our lives and what this means not just for, well, the medical field, healthcare, but also for our daily lives, Moran. Is this going to be the game changer? Everyone's talking about AI, which we'll get to in a bit. Everyone's talking about machine learning, edge computing. This might be the game-changing moment.
Yeah, so a lot of people are gambling on that being really a change in how a lot of things that the human race has not been able to do will be solved. The essence of it is that our brain is the same brain for many, many millennia, and there are some limitations to what this brain can do. We have a harder and harder time dealing with the world around us. And the question is, can we enhance the brain by essentially creating a digital component that will interface with that? That's the neural implant. And the idea here is that you can take a human brain, you can put a device inside the head, and this device interfaces with the brain from within, but also with the cloud outside, and gives us the power of the internet, of all of the information that's out there, as a way to think better and become smarter brain. There are people like Elon Musk and similar kind of entrepreneurs that gamble a lot on that. They gamble on that both in the sense that it will change the human race, save us, allow us to solve problems like find cures for disease that we, with our biological brain, couldn't solve. At the same time, there's another view to that, that it could be the end of human race because A, it will connect us to the world in such a way that we will lose ourselves and expose us to hacking into our thoughts and something like this, but also will create different castes of reality where those who have that could do remarkable thinking, and those who don't have that are just the regular humans that we all are right now and are limited by this flawed brain.
You mentioned Elon Musk a couple of times, and Neuralink is a startup that grabs the headlines, and we cover it all the time. But a fun fact that a lot of you all didn't know, the founding team at Neuralink, some of the top scientists that were actually hired at the start by Elon Musk, were actually hired from the research labs of Professor Cerf. So that's no mean feat. The future of this particular industry, and like you're saying, all of our futures collectively lie in some of your former students' hands and largely in terms of what you guys are doing. Even now at the research lab, there is an Elon Musk connection. Even now, it is a project that you get to work on, and that's why I said that in the introduction. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mind, since you have hacked my mind already, but can you tell us more about the mind of Elon Musk? Because this is a gentleman who's already thinking about conquering Mars, he's already talking about what's happening on planet Earth, and then this as well. What is it like dealing with Elon Musk on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
So there's a lot of gossip here, so I'm going to try to navigate that. Generally, we've been doing neural implants for research for the last, I would say, 20 years. I've been involved for the last 15. And this is, research-wise, a classical way to study the brain in animals, and an unorthodox way, but still viable, to study humans. So we've been working with patients whose brains a neurosurgeon opens on day one. We put the neural implant inside their head, study them, and then kind of understand how the brain works for a while. About 5 years ago, Neuralink was established when Elon Musk basically saw the opportunity of that becoming both a product, but also something that could be used by everyone to help a lot of people who have problems of various nature in the brain. And when he did that, he, of course, collectively took many of the students to work in our team with offering a lot more zeros in their salaries than they get in academia and making them work on this project, but also took a different approach that sped up things. When I was asked to gamble 5 years ago, how soon will they have neural implants, I said it's going to be decades. In less than 5 years, they already finished a lot of the clinical trials. They're now doing clinical trials with humans and got FDA approval for various stages. So they're moving in super fast pace, in that sense, beating academics in many ways. At the same time, our connection there is that our job as academics is to keep pushing the envelope on what we can do. So while Elon Musk's team is now looking at ways to solve mostly motor problems, so people who are sitting in a wheelchair would be able to not be in a wheelchair because their brain and the limbs are going to be reconnected using those neural implants. We're now looking at the future, which is how we can actually read your thoughts when you are unable to communicate them and give them to other people, how we can actually parse your dreams. And those are the things that presumably Elon Musk and his team will take as a next step after they finish what we did a few years ago.
Interesting. So we've already touched upon your Elon Musk connection. But now what happened on Jan 6th? You told us a little bit about it, but let's pick your brain a little bit more, Professor.
Sure.
The President of the United States, if he's in a room where nuclear codes have to be used, what is the advice that you've given him and his team? Because this is something that impacts all of us and the top leaders attending the India Today Conclave as well.
So I think this is, in my mind, one of the most important projects. And in a way, it's not just a US president project. It's, first of all, the other 8 countries that have nuclear weapons, including India, that need to think of how your leaders are approaching decisions of that magnitude. And at the same time, it's true for a lot of leaders in this room. So most of us are going to find ourselves at some point in our life making big decisions that shape everything. I can name a few just to give you an intuition. Having a child is one, getting married is one, maybe buying something very expensive is one. So those decisions are not like others. What you chose to have for lunch or what you're going to choose to have for dinner are small decisions that are insignificant, but all of you are going to make a few of those critical choices that shape everything. And the question is, how do you make them? How do you approach them? How do you think about proposing to your husband or your wife? And in that sense, what we spent the last 3 years doing is finding all kinds of key things that are important in how to make decisions, and we broke them down to a few advice that the president and his team can implement, but also everyone else. And I'll give you a concrete one to give you an intuition. There's something that we spend a lot of time doing with the current team, but also with a lot of leaders who come to us and say, I want to get the same training that Mr. Biden is getting, and that is, as a step one, just figuring out your decision profile. So in this room, there are a couple of hundreds of people, let's say. Presumably, there are different ways to make decisions. Some of you make decisions better in the morning, some in the evening, some when you're hungry, some when you're full, some when you're alone, some with other people, some before the deadline, some earlier. There are many profiles of decision, and step one is just figure out what your brain state is in an optimal condition and align the decision with that. So maybe if you're a decision maker whose job is to make critical choices and turns out you do better in the morning, we can align the board meeting with your optimal state. Some of you are going to have the opposite. That's one thing that we try to do with a lot of leaders, kind of find out what's their optimal state and help them align the reality. Other things we do are trainings that are in a way intuitive, but aren't done as often, like something we call pre-mortem. You probably all heard of a post-mortem, which is what you do after things ended up badly and how you analyze how it worked out negatively. Pre-mortem is a game that you play in your mind where you basically sit and you say, let's imagine right now that the worst case scenario has happened, that things failed. And we're now 10 weeks in the future after things failed, and we try to analyze backwards what led to this failure. So we basically play this mental game. And we say, imagine that the war started, and we lost everything, and we weren't prepared for that, and now we try to see what could have done, what could have led to this thing, what could have done to prevent it. What are the signposts that were there that we missed? How could we actually identify them earlier? Those are the things that we do with the president. I'll give you maybe one more, and then I'll kind of promise you that there are many, many more that are more complex and kind of are not for like a 30-second answer. But we ask the question, who gets to speak in what order when it comes to make a decision? Turns out that if a leader of a company or a leader of a country says, I think we should go left, what do you guys think? People tend to echo what they said. It's very hard to oppose your boss. So we kind of talk about who gets to speak in what order. How do you phrase the question so you get, as a leader, the best advice? You actually get people's intuition. Sometimes we ask them to vote anonymously, so the surfacing of the reality comes first, and then we can discuss that. All of those things, they're kind of trivial notes on how to make decisions, but when it comes to actually making big decisions, you realize that they're instrumental. And all of you can ask yourself right now, how would I approach a big decision tomorrow? And what are the conditions that I would want to set up? And you realize that it's not trivial. Who gets to vote, how many times you vote, what happens if there's a 60-40 vote versus 90-10, what happens if someone that you trust says the opposite of you, what happens if you feel that they don't have all the information. All of those things are things that leaders have to deal with a lot, and we help the president and his team basically tackle one after the other all of those things, so when they come to make the critical choices, they have spent time processing all of those nuances of a choice and are doing the best they can.
I'd love to be in your email inbox because just like the president reached out and Elon poached a lot of those young, talented scientists, another really interesting thing that happened a few months ago, and you can confirm, corroborate if it's true, is that the Pope himself from the Vatican reaches out to you to actually figure out how to formulate a policy on existential threats.
Sounds like the beginning of a joke. A rabbi, a pope, and
you're sure it wasn't on April 1st?
I think once you start working on nuclear decision making with leaders of the world, I think you become, and you speak about it publicly because you're an academic, you become also a visible character, and in that sense, a lot of people want to kind of get the same advice to get. So it's not surprising. In the particular case with the Pope, this is a story that I think is less known, so it might be interesting as an anecdote also. The Pope of 2024 is aware of the fact that we're dealing with a world that is full of existential threats. There are many things that could harm humanity: climate change, AI, neural implants and what we'll do to their brain, and of course nuclear war. The Pope of 1963 gave a famous speech titled Pacem in Terris, which is Peace on Earth, where he spoke about nuclear weapons as a huge threat to humanity and the Vatican's opinion on how the world should deal with that. This speech by the Pope ended up becoming a landmark speech. It was the day after on the cover of New York Times as the article on the headline. And a lot of people used that as a way to have a compass and a guideline to how the world should approach nuclear weapons.
But this was over 60 years ago.
This is 60 years ago. And it was centered on one threat that Pope thought would be the end of all things, which is nuclear weapons. The Pope of 2024 realized that there are more threats right now, and it's maybe a time to update this speech. And he brought me and other colleagues of mine from different disciplines, neuroscience, climate science, nuclear decision-making, and so on, and basically gave us the instruction to help him kind of frame somehow the Vatican's approach to those threats and what would his speech be 60 years later, which he gave recently in September, I believe. And the point is that the Vatican commands a lot of moral compasses of a lot of people, whether you're Christian or not. The Pope's sending a message on there's a problem with neural implants, maybe changing how we think, and I should address them before, help kind of navigate a lot of leaders and a lot of people's views, which is what the speech was about. So that was the behind the scene of what the Pope wanted to talk about.
Fair enough. We're glad that we're getting that behind the scenes access here at the India Today Conclave, the biggest stage of them all. Professor, you said AI, and that really piqued my interest, because if you're talking about AI as an existential threat, I want to look at it as a double-edged sword. As a technology enthusiast, I think maybe it could be a force for good, right? So it's kind of, I'm just putting two things together. You talk about critical decision-making, what my brain is going to do in the next few minutes, and how that could benefit me, or it could be for better or worse, obviously. But if we talk about AI, how many of you in the audience have used ChatGPT? A quick show of hands. Great, that's more than 90%. How many of you guys are usually satisfied with your responses on ChatGPT? Yes. Okay, that's less than half the audience. Now that's a great yardstick for us to go by. The biggest concern with AI is ethical considerations. If it's telling you things, it's becoming sentient, conscientious things, where can it go completely wrong or awry? If you had to advise the makers at OpenAI, and you can tell us a little bit about OpenAI and Neuralink as well, but if you had to advise Elon and Sam Altman and all of the powers that be in terms of getting the right safeguards in place, and the governments that you meet around the world, with your critical decision-making skills, where can we really enforce those guardrails, Professor?
So here are kind of notes on that. There's tension between capitalism and desire to see technology maturing and guardrails. It's not the first time it happened. Nuclear weapons, another example. We harnessed the power of the sun to build weapons during World War II, thinking they're going to be used for one thing, and then they ended up being used for war, but also to power cities, as nuclear energy is also useful for electricity. Trains were invented as a methodology to move freight from Los Angeles to New York in 48 hours compared to the many, many days it would take when you had a camel, but they also moved Jews to camps in Auschwitz. The trains, the nuclear energy, the AI, they don't tell you whether they're used for good or bad. It's how humans use them. So what we spend time now is saying, on the one hand, let's develop technologies that are remarkable, but let's also train people on how to use those technologies for good. Neural implants, like the other technologies, they can be used to give us the power of 250 IQ points human, who maybe will solve cancer researchers' flaws over the last 100 years in a moment. We'll just see the answer. Maybe we're going to be able to recover all kinds of questions in physics and math that we've been struggling with this ideal brain. But at the same time, those 250 IQ people with neural implants might, first of all, not want to interact with us mortals with only 100 IQ points, different species. Maybe they will also find us the way we find, I don't know, ants on the floor, as like useless and irrelevant, and create their own world where we are just kind of slaves that they give bananas to. In that sense, we don't know how it works out, and the reason it's important to think about it right now is because this decision is in everyone's hand. The scientists are going to push the envelope on creating neural implants or building nuclear energy or creating trains or many, many other things, because that's our job and that's what it is. But I think that the point of this talk, and the reason I think I'm here and the reason it's important that you take this message and think about it afterwards, is because at the end of the day, you have an election in a few months, the US has one. I would like to see people asking their leaders, what's their view on AI? What's your view on neural implants? What's your view on nuclear weapons? Because when this is out, it's too late. That's when the race has begun and the race to the bottom sometimes has begun. Right now, we still haven't kind of figured it out, so we can stop that. And it's true for AI, for neural implants, for nuclear energy, for many other things. AI, I'm a fan of as a user, as a creator, as a researcher, but also as a citizen, alarmed by and try to think of ways that I can stop my leaders from using it for bad.
But do you think these conversations are happening in the corridors of power, or these conversations about the future when you go to Davos and platforms like that? Shouldn't they be happening now? Because the genie's out of the bottle, Professor.
Yes, so I think that is an anecdote behind the scene. When this project of decision-making started in 2021, one of the first things that we went to the people who asked us for advice was with the idea of maybe we can use AI in the decision-making behind the president. And back in 2021, we were dismissed right away. People said, like, it's never going to happen. Like, no one's going to put a machine in the situation room. Forget about it. 3 years after, it's now on the menu, which means the world is warmed up for having AI in critical decisions as an advisor, as a tool, not as the decider itself, but it's already a step towards. With neural implants, when I did the research that kind of maybe paved the road to what you see in a lot of companies right now, it was clear that it's used with patients, and it's used with patients for situations that are kind of critical. They can't do it without this device or put it in their brain. Now, when Elon Musk speaks about neural implants, he uses the idea of a LASIK surgery. He keeps using the word LASIK surgery, as in putting the neural implant in your brain is nothing. It's like going to, LASIK surgery is the one that ophthalmologists use to basically fix your eyes. It's done in a 5 minutes kind of procedure, not even in a hospital in the US. He keeps using this term to refer to the brain surgery that's required to put the implants as a way to normalize that neural implant is not a big thing. And I think that that is the tension we live in. It's true that they're amazing. It's true that they're risky. It's true that kind of we live in a world where it's already, as you said, out of the box. It's going to be in our life, but it's not clear how it will be used and by whom and in what levels. And this is up to all of us to decide. I have a view. It doesn't really matter what my view is. You have to form your own, but argue for it, because I think the world would have to respond to it faster than we did with other things that took years. This one is going to take days or months from the day it's out to the day it's going to have a view.
But Professor, that's good marketing by Elon Musk, but it's a slippery slope to go down. I mean, to dismiss it or to make it sound trivial, right? I mean, there are perils to it as well. And there could be side effects.
Yeah. There could be negative things, first of all, to put it. So let's be clear. Neural implant means someone drills a hole in your head and puts a chip inside your brain, and it sits there, and it interacts on the one hand with neurons inside your head, and on the other side with a cloud. So your brain is exposed to a cloud. Hackers can now hack not just into your computer, but into your thought, and you would want things that you didn't really want because someone made you want that. You can imagine a world where companies start bidding on your thoughts. Like you say, oh, I really want to go and buy this toothpaste from Crest, and you wouldn't be sure that it was a Procter & Gamble that bid on your thought choosing this thing rather than Colgate getting you to choose the other one. Those ideas are really kind of unimaginable right now, but the jump from this is like a science fiction idea to its reality is now getting very, very short because people are already working on it. There's a saying that's kind of written in my lab's door that says the difference between science fiction and science is timing. And in that sense, I feel that these ideas are no longer kind of Star Trek and Star Wars movies ideas. They're already being developed in the labs, and this means that time to come up an opinion on that is before they are out.
He's sort of rubbed off on me as well as we end this conversation. I've saved the best for last. Well, I've hacked into the mind of our esteemed guests. It's a very special day for the professor. It turns out it's his birthday today, and he's here with us at the India Today Conclave. So a mighty round of applause. Happy birthday, Professor. Keep doing the great work that you do, and power on. I think your dad's in the audience as well. What a proud moment.
Yes.
And once again, thank you so much for sharing all those pearls of wisdom, and we're wiser at the end of it. A huge round of applause.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.